A woman's past is never just a list of memories, it's a map of psychological scars and imprints, each one leaving a trace on her present choices. Jung said the unconscious never forgets, and in her case, it shapes every gesture, every reaction, every promise she makes. We live in a culture that worships personal freedom and dismisses history, pretending that prior experiences don't echo into the future. But a man who ignores these echoes walks blindly into another person's unresolved story. What you meet in her today is not just her. It is the residue of everyone who came before you. The ghosts of patterns she never confronted, shadows she never integrated. And those shadows will shape your future if you don't learn to see them. Jung taught that every person walks through life wearing two faces. The persona, the polished, socially acceptable mask, and the shadow, the repressed, unfiltered self that leaks out through patterns we can't explain away. A woman may appear free, confident, effortlessly open, but that exterior is often the carefully engineered armor she forged to survive her past. The real story lies beneath, in the silent chambers of her psyche where disappointments, betrayals, and learned defenses twist into instinct. When she smiles, you see the persona. When she repeats the same destructive cycles, you're witnessing the shadow steering the wheel. And unless you learn to recognize which face she's showing you, you're not in a relationship, you're stepping into a psychological maze. She no longer knows how to escape. She seems effortlessly open about intimacy, almost disarmingly so. And at first, it feels like confidence, like you found a woman untouched by fear or inhibition. But this isn't confidence, it's erosion. Jung would say her instinctual boundaries, the ones that signal reverence, hesitation, emotional gravity, have been worn down by repetition. What should feel sacred instead feels strangely casual, mechanical, too smooth to be genuine. Her ease doesn't draw you in. It should unsettle you. Because a healthy feminine psyche guards intimacy with instinctive caution, not because of shame, but because she intuitively knows it carries weight. When she treats it like a casual topic or a familiar routine, you're not witnessing liberation, you're seeing the aftermath of psychic overexposure, the shadow's quiet confession that something important inside her has stopped recognizing value. A woman's natural boundaries are like the gates of a sacred temple, meant to open slowly, deliberately, with meaning behind every step closer. But with her, that temple feels abandoned. The walls, once meant to guard her softness, have been weathered down by too many entries, too many hurried connections, until the threshold no longer signals anything sacred. The small hesitations, the shy pauses, the quiet warmth that usually mark the beginning of something real are gone. In their place is a practiced ease, the kind that comes only from repetition, not authenticity. What should feel intimate instead feels transactional, as if you've stepped into a ritual that has been performed so many times it lost its soul. You don't feel invited into something precious, you feel like you're walking across ground that's been trampled flat, a place where meaning used to live but no longer does. Her reactions carry the polish of someone who has rehearsed the scene far too many times. The way she touches you, the way she leans in, the rhythm of her flirtation, it all has the smoothness of muscle memory, not the spark of discovery. There's no awkward charm, no genuine tension, no sense that she's crossing into new emotional territory. Instead, it feels like you've stepped into a role already written for a long line of men before you. Her laughter hits its cue, her compliments land too precisely. Her timing is almost unnervingly perfect. It's as if she's performing a script she knows by heart. Technically flawless, emotionally vacant. And the more you pay attention, the more you realize you're not experiencing a unique moment, you're witnessing a reenactment. The intimacy feels pre-recorded, her presence split, her soul elsewhere, while her body moves through familiar motions. What should feel electric instead feels like déjà vu, and that is the quiet warning most men miss. She can sit beside you, smile at the right moments, even hold your hand, but there is a distance you can't cross, no matter how close you get. It's the kind of separation Jung compared to a psychic fortress. Invisible, silent, impenetrable. You sense she is there in body but absent in essence, as if a sheet of cold, transparent glass has been lowered between you. You see her eyes, but not her interior world. You hear her voice, but not her truth. And this isn't momentary hesitation or the natural caution of a woman who needs time. This is a chronic inability to let anyone in. The emotional circuitry that should allow connection has been rewired by too many past fractures. She moves through the motions of intimacy, while her deeper self locks itself away, sealed behind that wall where no man is allowed to enter. She speaks in stories that skim the surface, never touching the pulse beneath. When you offer something vulnerable, she returns something polished, but hollow, a pleasant-sounding sentence with no emotional weight behind it. The deeper you try to go, the faster she withdraws. A joke, a deflection, a sudden change of topic. Anything to avoid opening the sealed door inside her. Jung would say she has poured concrete over the entrance to her own unconscious. Years of attachment ruptures hardened her instinct. When closeness approaches, she retreats into silence or erupts just enough to push you back. Conflict doesn't draw her into repair. It triggers escape mode. She was trained by her history, not to resolve, but to run. And so you end up in a relationship with only half a person. Her body beside you. Her emotions buried underground where even she refuses to look. Her social world is never quiet. Her phone lights up like a control panel, messages from just friends, comments from men who orbit her like satellites, all hungry for a fragment of her attention. She treats it casually, but there's nothing casual about it. A woman with a long trail of past entanglements almost always carries an entourage of half-closed doors behind her. Exes who linger, admirers who never left, men who wait for the smallest signal to step back in. This isn't a coincidence, it's a psychological ecosystem she depends on. Jung would call it a fragmented anima, seeking validation not from one connection, but from many sources at once. To her, these men are not friends. They are mirrors reflecting back her desirability, proof she still holds power. The more fractured her inner world, the more external attention she needs to feel whole. And without realizing it, you are stepping into a crowded room where you will never be the only one she listens to. These men don't just appear in her life. They are maintained, fed, and kept warm like embers she refuses to let die. Each message, each playful reply, each, "Oh, he's just a friend," is part of a subconscious system she built over years of instability. To her, attention is oxygen, and one man can never provide enough of it. Jung would say, her shadow has learned to survive through dispersion, scattering emotional energy across multiple sources, so she never has to face the terror of true dependence. These connections form her psychological insurance policy. If things with you feel shaky, she already has backups waiting. If she feels bored, insecure, or misunderstood, there are a dozen men ready to offer validation on demand. And though she may not consciously strategize it, her behavior reveals a deep-rooted fear, the fear of emotional scarcity. She can't cut off the orbit because she needs it. Her self-worth depends on constant external reinforcement. You think she's committed to you, but she's committed to the ecosystem that keeps her ego alive. You are not competing with one man. You are competing with an entire audience she carefully feeds, often without even knowing why. She learned long ago that intimacy isn't just connection, it's leverage. What should be an expression of closeness has become her strongest bargaining chip, a tool she wields with silent precision. Sometimes she withholds it, not because she's upset, but because she knows the withdrawal will make you lean in, apologize faster, soften your boundaries. Other times, she offers it at the perfect moment, right after a mistake, right before asking for something. Exactly when she needs to reset the emotional balance in her favor. None of it feels accidental. Jung would call this the shadows economy, when genuine affection is replaced with strategic exchange. She has lived through enough short-lived relationships to know exactly how powerful her physical presence is, and she uses it the way a seasoned negotiator uses silence. What should feel like closeness begins to feel like a transaction. You sense the calculation behind the warmth, the timing too perfect, the patterns too repeatable. And once you recognize it, the truth becomes unavoidable. She isn't connecting with you, she's managing you. You start to notice the rhythm, the sudden warmth, after days of distance, the unexpected softness right after conflict, the perfectly timed affection whenever she senses you slipping from her grasp. This isn't intuition, it's conditioning. She alternates closeness and withdrawal with the precision of someone who has learned, through trial and error, exactly how to keep a man slightly hungry. Not starving, not fulfilled, just hungry enough to chase. This is the psychology of intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that keeps gamblers pulling levers and lovers losing themselves. Jung would say, her shadow manipulates not with cruelty, but with survival instinct. She learned that controlling access to intimacy gives her power over a man's emotional world, and so she uses it, rewarding your compliance, punishing your resistance, giving you just enough affection to keep hope alive. You begin to realize you're not in a relationship built on reciprocity. You're in a psychological loop crafted by someone who has turned desire into a weapon. Every kiss, every withdrawal, every moment of closeness becomes part of a cycle designed not to bond you, but to bind you. She studies you the way a surgeon studies a pulse, quietly, precisely, with an uncanny instinct for where you're strongest and where you're fragile. At first, her admiration feels intoxicating. She knows exactly what to praise: your ambition, your intelligence, your potential. Her words strike so perfectly that you feel seen in a way no one else has managed. But perfection is the giveaway. Real admiration is warm and flawed. Hers is engineered. This is the mark of a woman who has learned male psychology not from books, but from repetition, from dissecting the hearts of men before you. Jung would say, she hasn't integrated her shadow, she has sharpened it. She uses insight the way a scalpel is used in an operation. Precise cuts, intentional incisions, time to create both dependency and awe. Her compliments elevate you just enough to make you open, soft, receptive, and later, she will use that same precision to strike a subtle criticism in the exact place she once praised, destabilizing you with surgical accuracy. To you, it feels mystical, like she understands you better than anyone ever has. But nothing mystical is happening. It's muscle memory born from emotional experiments long before you arrived. One week she crowns you as exceptional, the rare man with vision, courage, and depth. The next week, with a single offhand comment, she punctures that very image. She'll say you seem hesitant, less decisive, maybe even afraid to take real risks. The blow lands exactly where her praise once lifted you. This is not coincidence, it's calibration. She creates an emotional altitude only to drop you from it, ensuring you rely on her to feel elevated again. Jung called this the inflation-deflation cycle of the anima. The woman becomes both muse and tormentor, feeding your ego before cutting it open. The roller coaster keeps your nervous system in a state of alert. And in that tension, you confuse chaos for passion. Her emotional choreography makes you addicted not to her, but to the unpredictable way she makes you feel. She isn't doing this with conscious malice. She learned through dozens of past entanglements exactly which strings control a man's sense of self. Every moment of vulnerability she displays, every tear, every whispered insecurity is delivered with uncanny timing, blurring the line between authenticity and performance. You think you're building a connection, but in reality, you're reacting to stimuli she mastered long before you entered the story. She speaks about her past with a boldness that feels less like confidence and more like armor, bright, metallic, and too polished to be real. A healthy person carries a natural sense of reverence for intimacy, a quiet awareness that not everything should be displayed under fluorescent lights. But she has flipped that instinct upside down. Instead of delicacy, she shows defiance. Instead of introspection, she shows pride. Jung called this reaction formation, when someone feels a truth so uncomfortable, so threatening, that they express the opposite emotion with exaggerated force. Her bravado isn't freedom, it's camouflage. Each casual story about old lovers, each dismissive laugh about past chaos, is a signal that she refuses to look inward. She hides the shame she cannot face by drowning it in performance. And when you question anything, even gently, she attacks with ideology, accusations, and rehearsed rhetoric. She isn't trying to explain her past. She's trying to stay ahead of it. She treats her romantic past the way a reckless investor treats a long streak of financial losses, by calling it experience, instead of admitting the pattern. Every failed connection becomes a badge of supposed wisdom. Every breakup reframed as growth instead of consequence. But beneath the confident storytelling lies a deeper fracture. She has spent her emotional capital recklessly, pouring herself into short-lived highs with no understanding of long-term value. Jung would say her psyche is split between the persona that insists she's empowered and the shadow that knows she's exhausted. She talks about her history as if it were a resume, but the details reveal something closer to repeated bankruptcy. When someone shows pride where there should be reflection, you aren't dealing with confidence, you're dealing with someone who can't afford to look inward. To her, acknowledging the truth would mean confronting the very chaos she's been running from. So, she reinscribes the narrative, turning instability into a philosophy and calling it liberation. Her relationship history reads like a loop rather than a line. A carousel of beginnings that never evolve, connections that burn bright and die fast. She speaks of past relationships as bad timing or mutual decisions. But the pattern is unmistakable. Short bursts of intensity followed by abrupt endings. Jung called this novelty seeking, the psyche's addiction to the dopamine of the chase. She isn't in love with men, she's in love with the feeling of being desired. Once the initial spark fades, once routine enters, once the mask must drop and real intimacy begins, she feels the walls closing in. Boredom creeps in, irritation follows. Then a restless energy takes over her shadow, whispering that there's something better just beyond the next horizon. So she exits, quickly and cleanly, already scanning for the next high. She isn't leaving you for another man. She's leaving you for the thrill her psyche can't live without. She moves through life with the spirit Jung called the puer aeternus, the eternal child, the soul that refuses the weight of adulthood. Emotionally, she remains in a perpetual springtime, seeking excitement, worshiping freedom, fearing anything that roots her in place. Responsibility feels like confinement. Stability feels like suffocation. Commitment feels like a cage closing around her. In this state, she doesn't build. She flutters. She doesn't bond. She samples. She treats relationships like temporary shelters, places to rest until the weather changes, not homes she intends to maintain. And because she's never learned the emotional muscles required for long-term partnership, patience, compromise, accountability, she defaults to escape the moment discomfort arises. To her, each new man is a symbol, not a person. A fresh start, a new identity, another chance to outrun the emptiness inside. But symbols fade, and reality always returns. So she leaves again, chasing the next spark, never realizing she's burning through her own future. Every relationship she enters follows the same psychological script, so predictable that once you see it, you can almost set a clock to it. The opening is always intoxicating. Idealization, so intense it feels fated, almost spiritual. She mirrors you perfectly, studies your preferences, becomes the woman you've always imagined. But this phase isn't connection, it's projection. She's casting you in a role she's rehearsed with every man before you. Then comes the shift. The glow fades. What once fascinated her now irritates her. The small quirks she adored become flaws she can't tolerate. She grows cold, distant, easily triggered. You try harder, thinking you did something wrong, but you're only falling into the next act of her pattern, devaluation. Jung would say you're no longer interacting with her conscious self, you're bumping into the shadow she's spent her life avoiding. Finally, she executes the same exit she's performed dozens of times. A sudden breakup, a vague explanation, a line like, "We're too different," or, "I don't want to hurt you." And just like that, you're out of the story, replaced by the next beginning she's already chasing. You don't ruin her relationships, her cycle does. A cycle she doesn't see, but you will feel. Before you try to diagnose her, Jung would tell you to look inward, because a man doesn't collide with a woman like this by accident. Something in you responds to her chaos, her intensity, her wounds. Something in you is magnetized to her instability, even if you call it chemistry. This is your shadow, speaking the unintegrated parts of your own psyche that seek recognition through another person. Maybe you're drawn by a savior complex, the unconscious urge to fix what's broken because you've never healed that same fracture within yourself. Maybe her emotional volatility awakens an old wound from childhood, something familiar, something your psyche keeps circling back to. Or perhaps her wildness reflects the freedom you secretly desire but never allowed yourself to explore. Whatever the reason, the uncomfortable truth is this: she is a mirror. Her patterns expose your inner conflicts. Her instability reveals your hunger for intensity over peace. Her inability to attach highlights your own fears around intimacy, commitment, or self-worth. The relationship becomes a psychological battlefield where both shadows collide, and the man who doesn't recognize his own will be consumed by hers. A moment always comes when you must choose not between her and another woman, but between her and yourself. Jung said, "The greatest act a man can perform is to honor his own destiny, and relationships are the crucible where that truth is tested." A woman's past is not a moral issue, it's a psychological forecast. Patterns predict outcomes. Cycles repeat unless confronted. And if her history screams instability, fragmentation, and emotional flight, then choosing her means choosing the storm she carries. You cannot build a life with someone who treats connection like a revolving door. You cannot find peace with someone addicted to chaos. You cannot secure a future with someone whose shadow dictates her choices while she denies it even exists. A high-value man does not negotiate with red flags, he pays attention to them. He trusts the instinct that whispers run. The question isn't whether she deserves love. The real question is whether you deserve a partner capable of depth, exclusivity, and emotional maturity. A woman whose soul is ready to stand beside yours, not drag it into her unfinished chapters. So, ask yourself honestly, when you saw the signs, did you feel the urge to save her or the instinct to protect yourself? One response leads to self-betrayal. The other leads to freedom, and your future depends entirely on which voice you choose to obey.